You two-faced witch. You wrecked my life and my marriage." The words hit me like ice water. Marianne Brooks, still beautiful at 58, still commanding attention, stands swaying near the adjacent table, her emerald cocktail dress shimmering under the lights. Her face is flushed, her carefully styled blonde hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes burn with an anger I recognize all too well. Seattle, the Four Seasons Hotel ballroom, the music stops mid-note. Conversations die. 200 pairs of eyes turn toward us, waiting. I feel my breath catch in my throat as the elegant ballroom fades away, replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of Willowcrest High's hallways, where a 17-year-old girl once poured Coca-Cola on my backpack while her friends laughed. This story begins at a glittering 40-year high school reunion, but the night isn't just about laughter and nostalgia. Long-buried secrets rise to the surface: jealousy, betrayal, old wounds, and even the first love. Before we begin the story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it truly helps support this channel. Now, let's turn back time. 41 years ago, Willowcrest High School, Seattle. The chemistry lab smelled of sulfur and teenage anxiety that Tuesday afternoon. I had been hunched over my notebook, copying equations from the blackboard, when I heard the familiar click of expensive heels approaching my desk. "Oh, how cute," Marianne O'Donnell's voice dripped with mock sweetness. "Laura is still using that same ratty backpack from freshman year." I didn't look up. I had learned that acknowledging Marianne only made things worse. My fingers tightened around my pencil as I continued writing, pretending the heat wasn't rising in my cheeks. Teresa Delgado giggled from somewhere behind me. "Maybe her mom can't afford a new one," she whispered, loud enough for half the class to hear. The familiar knot formed in my stomach. They weren't wrong. My mom couldn't afford a new backpack. She couldn't afford much of anything, working double shifts at the Safeway just to keep our tiny one-bedroom apartment. But I had washed this backpack by hand every weekend for 3 years, always clean, even if the blue fabric had faded to gray in places. Oops. The sticky sweetness hit my backpack with a splash, dark cola soaking through the worn fabric and pooling on my desk. Marianne stood over me, an empty Coke can in her perfectly manicured hand, her glossy lips curved in a smile that never reached her green eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent classroom. "How clumsy of me." Teresa's laughter tinkled like broken bells. A few other students snickered, but most just stared, their faces a mixture of pity and relief that they weren't the target. I felt something inside me crack, but I kept my expression neutral as I lifted my notebook away from the spreading puddle. The cola had already seeped through to my textbooks, and I knew the smell would linger for days. "Hey." Alan Brooks's voice cut through the tension. I looked up to see him striding across the room, his usually gentle face tight with anger. "What's wrong with you, Marianne?" "It was an accident," Marianne said, but her defiant chin told a different story. "No, it wasn't." Alan's voice was quiet but firm. He grabbed a handful of paper towels from the lab station and began cleaning my desk. "You did that on purpose." "Alan, it's okay," I whispered, mortified by the attention. "Really, it's not a big deal." But it was a big deal to Alan. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the careful way he handled my soggy textbooks. Alan Brooks, quiet, thoughtful Alan who spent lunch periods in the library reading Steinbeck and Hemingway while other boys played basketball. Alan who had never said more than 10 words to me but somehow always seemed to appear when Marianne was at her worst. "Come on," he said softly, shouldering my damp backpack. "Let's get out of here." I followed him into the hallway, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished linoleum. "Are you okay?" Alan asked, his brown eyes full of concern. I forced a smile, the same smile I'd perfected for my mother when she asked about my day, the same smile I wore when classmates whispered about my second-hand clothes. "I'm fine. It's just a backpack, I can wash it at home." But Alan didn't look convinced. He studied my face with an intensity that made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with humiliation. "She shouldn't treat you like that," he said. "Nobody should." I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Marianne is just, Marianne. She doesn't like me very much." "Why?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. I almost laughed. "Why? Because I was poor. My jeans came from Goodwill, worn and faded, and my shoes had holes in the soles. Because my mother worked in a grocery store while hers were both doctors. Because despite all of that, I still managed to get the highest grades in advanced English and AP history. But most of all, because of the way Alan looked at me, the same way he was looking at me right now, with a gentleness that made Marianne's emerald eyes flash with something darker than mere dislike. "I don't know," I lied. Alan shifted my backpack to his other shoulder. "Want me to walk you to your locker?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we walked down the empty hallway, our footsteps echoing off the tile walls, I snuck glances at his profile. Alan Brooks was nothing like the boys Marianne usually chased, not flashy or loud or wealthy. He was steady and kind, with ink-stained fingers from the poetry he wrote when he thought no one was watching. At my locker, he waited while I stuffed my damp belongings inside. The hallway smelled of floor wax and teenage dreams, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the marching band practicing for Friday's football game. "Laura," Alan said softly as I closed my locker door. "Yes?" He opened his mouth as if to say something important, then seemed to lose his nerve. I hope your backpack is okay." I smiled, a real smile this time. "It will be. Thank you, Alan." 3 months later, he asked me to prom. Greg Lawson had been the one to give him the courage, cornering him at his locker and insisting that life was too short to admire someone from afar. I wore a dress from JCPenney that my mother had saved for 3 months to buy, and Alan wore his father's suit, altered to fit his lanky frame. We danced to Time After Time, and Careless Whisper, our movements awkward but earnest. When he walked me to our apartment building's front steps at midnight, he kissed me with the gentle reverence of a boy who had been dreaming of that moment for years. It was the most beautiful night of my young life. 2 weeks later, my father called with an offer that would change everything. His bagel shop in Brooklyn was struggling, and he needed help. The offer came with a tiny apartment above the shop and the promise of a fresh start away from the whispers and sideways glances of Seattle. I left 3 days after graduation, without saying goodbye to anyone except Denise. I was 18 and terrified and desperate to escape the life that made me feel small and powerless. I didn't know that Alan spent that entire summer writing me letters he never sent, or that Marianne O'Donnell, fresh from her triumph at finally getting my attention off him, threw herself a birthday party, where lonely boys and flowing alcohol, which was not even allowed because they were only 18, created the kind of night that changes everything. By Christmas, Marianne was pregnant. By Valentine's Day, she was Mrs. Allen Brooks, and I was 3,000 miles away, learning to make the perfect bagel and dreaming of a future where I would never again have to smile and pretend that cruelty didn't hurt. Brooklyn, New York. The bell above my father's bagel shop door chimed constantly that first summer, but not because we were busy. Dad had installed it to sound cheerful, but mostly it announced the departure of customers who took one look at our limited selection and decided to try somewhere else. People want more than plain and sesame, I told Dad one morning as I swept flour from behind the counter. The shop smelled of yeast and old grease, and the ancient cash register stuck every third transaction. Dad looked up from his book, always a book, usually Dickens or Dostoevsky, and shrugged. "They want what they want," he said in his philosophical way. "But this is what we have." That attitude might have worked for Dad, who seemed content to open at 6 and close at 2, spending his afternoons reading in the back booth. But I had seen what getting by looked like. I had lived in that tiny Seattle apartment where Mom counted pennies and worried about the electric bill. I was 18 years old, and I was done with just getting by. I spent my first paycheck at the library, checking out every business book I could carry. Marketing for small business, customer service excellence, the economics of the food industry. While Dad dozed over Tolstoy, I sat in our cramped apartment above the shop, reading by lamplight and taking notes in the margins of my composition books. The next month, I introduced turkey and Swiss bagel sandwiches. Then I added a few varieties of cream cheese, sun-dried tomato, herb and garlic, strawberry. Dad raised his eyebrows at the expense, but he didn't say no. "Where did you learn to make this?" Ms. Lee asked one Tuesday morning, biting into an everything bagel with lox spread that I'd created from scratch. She was a picky customer, never easily impressed, but fiercely loyal once something won her over. "Trial and error," I said, which was mostly true. What I didn't mention were the nights I'd spent experimenting with different spice combinations, or the way I studied successful delis during my lunch breaks, noting what drew people in and what sent them away. By my second year, we had lines on weekend mornings. By my third, I had convinced Dad to let me install an espresso machine, a used Italian model I'd found at a restaurant supply warehouse. "Coffee?" Dad had said, looking skeptical. "People come here for bagels." "They come here for breakfast," I corrected. "And breakfast means coffee." The espresso machine changed everything. Suddenly we were not just a neighborhood bagel shop, we became a destination. The rich aroma of coffee mixed with baking bread created an atmosphere that made people want to linger. I learned to make cappuccinos and lattes, and I watched our daily receipts climb steadily upward. The day an Oscar-winning actress walked through our door was the day everything shifted into a higher gear. She was filming a movie nearby and had heard about our lavender honey bagels from her makeup artist. Within a week, there was a line around the block, and food columnists were calling us Brooklyn's best-kept secret. "We're not secret anymore," Dad observed, watching the crowd through our window. "No," I agreed, "we're not." When Mr. Goldstein, who owned the pharmacy next door, decided to retire, I didn't hesitate. I had been saving every penny for 5 years, and I used it all to expand our space. Suddenly we had room for 20 tables instead of 5, a proper kitchen instead of a hot plate, and enough space for the staff we desperately needed. My days started at 4 in the morning and ended at 9 at night. My hands always carried the lingering scent of flour and coffee grounds, a mix of warm bread and rich espresso that never seemed to fade. And I fell asleep each night with business plans scattered across my bed sheets. But for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. Not powerful in the way that Marianne had been, with her family's money and social connections, but powerful because I was building something that was entirely mine. Ethan started coming in during my 6th year. Every morning at 7:15, black coffee and an everything bagel with cream cheese, always reading the Wall Street Journal, always polite but distant. He was older than me, maybe early 30s, with dark hair streaked at the temples and expensive suits that suggested he worked somewhere important. It took me months to work up the courage to ask him about his work. "Investment management," he said, folding his newspaper carefully. "Nothing too exciting." But his eyes lit up when he talked about it, and I found myself looking forward to those brief conversations. Ethan asked intelligent questions about my business, and he listened to my answers with the kind of attention that made me feel heard. When he finally asked me to dinner, I almost said no. Dating felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, something for people who didn't have businesses to run and dreams to build. "One dinner," he insisted gently. "What's the worst that could happen?" The worst that could happen, I discovered, was falling completely in love with a man who understood ambition because he had his own, who thought my dreams were reasonable rather than impossible, who made me laugh until my sides ached and who kissed me like I was something precious. We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a reception in the shop surrounded by the people who had become my chosen family. Our regular customers, my employees, Dad with flour still dusting his sleeves. "You did good, kiddo," Dad whispered as we danced to Ella Fitzgerald between the tables. "We did good," I corrected, looking around at the life we'd built together. Ethan encouraged me to go back to school, and I earned my business degree at night while running the shop during the day. When Sarah was born, I brought her to work in a carrier, and she took her first steps between the counter and the espresso machine. Emma came 3 years later, and suddenly our life was beautifully chaotic, business meetings interrupted by diaper changes, romantic dinners that ended early because of teething babies, family vacations planned around the shop's schedule. But it was a good chaos, the kind that comes from having more blessings than you know how to manage. The expansion to multiple locations happened gradually. First, another shop in Park Slope when a perfect space became available. Then one in Manhattan's Upper West Side. Each new location brought new challenges, hiring managers I could trust, maintaining quality across multiple kitchens, managing the kind of growth that could easily spiral out of control. Ethan became my unofficial business advisor, helping me navigate loan applications and lease negotiations. He had a gift for seeing potential problems before they materialized, and his calm presence grounded me during the inevitable crises that came with rapid expansion. 16 locations, he said one evening as we reviewed the quarterly reports. Remember when you worried about selling 50 bagels a day? I still worry about selling 50 bagels a day, I admitted. I worry about it at 16 different locations now. He laughed and pulled me away from the paperwork. That's what makes you good at this. You never take success for granted. We had achieved something that would have seemed impossible to that scared 18-year-old girl who arrived in Brooklyn with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Our daughters were thriving in their own lives, our marriage had grown stronger with every challenge we faced, and our business had blossomed into a small empire that we had built from nothing. The call came on a Tuesday morning last spring. Ethan had collapsed during his morning run, and by the time the paramedics arrived, it was already too late. A massive heart attack, they said. He wouldn't have suffered. The funeral was standing room only. Our customers came, our employees, people from his office, neighbors we'd known for decades. Everyone had a story about Ethan's kindness, his quiet generosity, his ability to make others feel valued and heard. I stood at the podium in my black dress, looking out at the sea of faces, and realized that grief was the price we pay for love, and it was worth every agonizing moment. Sarah moved back from Boston to help with the business. Emma, now married and living in Brooklyn herself, took over the books and marketing. Together, we kept the empire running while I learned how to be a widow at 57, how to sleep alone after 26 years of marriage, how to make decisions without my partner and best friend. The Seattle expansion had been Ethan's idea originally. "You're from there," he'd pointed out. "It's time to go home." Home. I hadn't thought of Seattle as home in decades. But as I signed the lease for our 17th location in Pike Place Market, I realized he was right. It was time to close that circle, to return to where it all began with something to show for the journey. The reunion invitation had arrived 6 months after Ethan's funeral, forwarded from my mother's old address. 40 years. Willow Crest High School class of 1985. For the first time in 4 decades, I would be in Seattle with time to spare. Perhaps it was time to face those old ghosts and see how much we'd all changed. In Seattle, the Four Seasons lobby buzzes with nervous energy and finely crafted luggage as I wheel my suitcase toward the reception desk. Everywhere I look, I see faces that almost match my memories, familiar bone structure softened by time, teenage expressions now framed by silver hair and laugh lines. Laura? Laura Whitfield. I turned to find a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, her auburn hair now streaked with gray but her energy unmistakably familiar. Denise. I set down my luggage and embrace my old friend, feeling 18 again for just a moment. You look wonderful. So do you. And I'm so sorry about Ethan. I read about it online and wanted to reach out, but... It's okay, I say gently, the familiar ache settling in my chest. Thank you. Denise links her arm through mine as we walk toward the cocktail reception area near the lobby bar. I can't believe you're finally here. 40 years, Laura. 40 years, and everyone here has been holding their breath, waiting for this moment. The guilt hits me immediately. I know. I should have come back sooner. I kept meaning to, but the business, and the girls, life, and you know. Hey. She squeezes my arm. You built an empire. We all read about it in the alumni newsletter. 16 locations. And now you're opening one here? Yes, in Pike Place Market. We're opening in 2 months. That's incredible. Oh, there's so much to catch up on. Did you see the schedule? We're doing a school tour in an hour, then dinner tonight, and the dance party after. Greg organized everything. You remember Greg Lawson, right? Alan's best friend? My stomach does a little flip at the mention of Alan's name, but I nod. Of course. Is Alan here? Oh yes, he and Marianne are around somewhere. They are. Denise glances around and lowers her voice. Well, things are complicated with them. You'll see. Before I can ask what she means, a booming voice cuts through the cocktail chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention. Greg Lawson stands near the bar, holding a microphone and looking remarkably like his teenage self, just with less hair and more confidence. The buses are here for our school tour. Time to revisit the scene of the crime. Laughter ripples through the crowd as people begin moving toward the lobby doors. I spot him then, Alan Brooks, standing near the far windows with a woman whose perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress immediately identify her as Marianne. Even from across the room, I can see the tension between them. Marianne's smile looks forced, and Alan keeps checking his watch as if he'd rather be anywhere else. When their eyes meet mine across the crowded lobby, Alan's face softens with something I can't quite read. Marianne's expression hardens. Come on, Denise says, apparently noticing my gaze. Let's get on the bus before all the good seats are taken. Willowcrest High School looks exactly the same from the outside, red brick and tall windows, the same flagpole where we used to gather before classes. But inside, everything has been updated. The hallways gleam with fresh paint and new lockers, and the classrooms sport smart boards instead of the old chalkboards I remember. And here, Greg announces as our group crowds into what used to be the chemistry lab, is where most of us nearly blew ourselves up trying to balance equations. Everyone laughs, but I find myself staring at the spot where my desk used to be. Where Marianne spilled that Coke 40 years ago, where Alan first showed me kindness that changed the trajectory of my teenage heart. Laura, do you remember sitting right here? Teresa Delgado appears at my elbow, her voice still carrying that musical quality I remember, though her face shows the wear of 4 decades. You were always so good at chemistry. I used to copy your homework. I smile at her honesty. I remember you being much better at making friends than I was. Teresa's expression grows serious for a moment. Yeah, well, Sometimes being good at making friends means choosing the wrong ones. Before I can respond, Marianne's voice cuts across the room. Oh, how adorable. A little reunion within the reunion. She approaches with the same confident stride I remember, though now there's something brittle about her perfection. Her dress is beautiful, her makeup flawless, her jewelry expensive. But her smile doesn't reach her eyes, and I notice Alan hanging back, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Marianne, I say calmly. You look lovely. Thank you. I heard you've done quite well for yourself. Selling bagels, isn't it? The condescension in her voice is subtle but unmistakable. Some things never change. I own a small chain of bakeries, I reply evenly. We do well enough. How nice. Her smile grows sharper. It must be so fulfilling, working with your hands. I think of my employees, my customers, the satisfaction of building something from nothing. It is. Alan steps closer, his face flushed with embarrassment. Marianne, don't. Don't what? She snaps, turning on him. Don't make conversation? Don't be friendly with old classmates? The room grows quiet, and I see Greg making his way over with the forced cheer of someone trying to prevent a scene. Hey, how about we check out the old cafeteria? He suggests brightly. I've got a surprise waiting there. The surprise turns out to be a recreated version of our high school lunch, pizza squares, chocolate milk, and those peculiar rectangular hamburgers that somehow tasted better than they looked. We sit at the same style of long tables, and for a while, the years melt away as we share stories and remember teachers who seemed ancient then but were probably younger than we are now. Marianne and Alan sit across from each other at a table near the windows, but they might as well be on different planets. She makes pointed comments about his outfit, his choice of drink, the way he's eating. He responds with the weary patience of someone who's had this conversation 1,000 times before. Some things never change, Denise whispers to me. They've been like this forever. Like what? I didn't get it. Bitter. She's never forgiven him for not loving her the way she wanted to be loved. And he's never forgiven himself for settling. I watch them across the room and feel a deep sadness for both of them. Marianne, still beautiful but sharp with unhappiness. Alan, still thoughtful but worn down by years of disappointment. When our school tour ends, we're all laughing and talking as we board the buses back to the hotel. The nostalgia is infectious. Even the people who hated high school seem caught up in the warm memory of being young and full of possibilities. But as I settle into my seat, I catch Marianne staring at me from across the aisle. Her expression is unreadable, but something in her eyes reminds me of that 17-year-old girl who poured soda on my backpack because she couldn't bear the thought of not being the center of attention. Some wounds, I realize, never quite heal. The reunion dinner takes place in the hotel's grand ballroom, decorated with our class colors and blown-up photos from our yearbook. I'm seated at a table with Denise and her husband, along with several other classmates whose faces I recognize but whose names I have to peek at their name tags to remember. The conversation flows easily over the appetizer course. Everyone wants to hear about New York, about the business, about my daughters. When I mention that Sarah is planning to open a location in Seattle, the excitement is genuine. Pike Place Market, I explain. We'll have fresh bagels, artisan coffee, and some specialty sandwiches. Sarah's incredibly talented, she's actually improved on several of my original recipes. That's wonderful, says Janet Morrison, who apparently became a teacher. I remember your parents' grocery store job. Look how far you've come. My mother worked at a grocery store, I correct gently. My father owned a small bagel shop in Brooklyn. Oh, that's right. Still, what an inspiration. From humble beginnings to this huge success. Across the room, I notice Marianne listening to our conversation with a fixed smile. Alan sits beside her, methodically eating his salmon and avoiding eye contact with anyone. 17 bagel shops, Denise says proudly, raising her voice slightly. And this one in Seattle will make it even better. Laura lived in a beautiful penthouse in Manhattan before she moved to Brooklyn. And her house in Brooklyn. My husband and I went to her 50th birthday party there. It was like something out of a magazine. I try to catch Denise's eye, to signal her to tone it down, but she's on a roll. The garden alone was bigger than our entire backyard. And her daughters are both brilliant. Sarah has an MBA from Wharton, and Emma married a lawyer who is not just smart but also incredibly sweet. Laura's living proof that with hard work and determination. How inspiring. Marianne's voice cuts across our table like ice water. She's standing behind Denise's chair, her wine glass nearly empty and her carefully applied makeup starting to smudge slightly around her eyes. Selling bagels for a living, she continues, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the neighboring tables. How quaint. The conversations around us begin to die as people sense trouble brewing. It's honest work, I say calmly, though my heart is starting to race. Oh, I'm sure it is. Very honest. Very, blue collar. She takes another sip of wine, her movements slightly unsteady. Much more honest than some people, anyway. Alan appears at her elbow, his face tense with worry. Marianne, maybe we should. Should what? Pretend that Saint Laura here didn't ruin our lives? Pretend that she didn't manipulate everyone into thinking she was so innocent and sweet while she plotted and schemed? The ballroom is growing quieter now, conversations trailing off as more people turn to watch our table. I feel the familiar heat in my cheeks. The same helpless feeling I used to get in high school when Marianne decided to make me her target. I don't know what you're talking about, I say quietly. Oh, don't you? Don't you remember prom night? Don't you remember making your grand exit right after graduation, leaving poor Alan devastated and available? Marianne, stop, Alan says urgently. You're drunk. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing myself? She whirls on him, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. I'm not the one who spent 40 years pining after some fantasy woman who abandoned him. The ballroom has gone almost completely silent now. Even the waitstaff has stopped moving, frozen like actors in a play who've forgotten their lines. Greg appears from somewhere in the crowd, his face flushed with the authority of someone who's been managing this reunion for months. Hey, everyone, he says loudly, clapping his hands together. The DJ's ready to start the dance portion of the evening. Who's ready to relive their youth with some classic 80s hits? But Marianne isn't finished. She turns back to me, her green eyes bright with 40 years of accumulated resentment. You think you're so perfect, don't you? With your successful business and your perfect marriage and your perfect daughters. Well, let me tell you something about your perfect life. And that's when she screams it, the words that bring everything crashing back to that afternoon in chemistry class, you two-faced witch. You wrecked my life and my marriage. The ballroom goes dead silent. The band stops mid-note. 200 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting to see what I'll do, how I'll respond to this public humiliation from the girl who made my teenage years a misery. For a moment, I'm 17 again, sticky soda dripping from my backpack, Teresa's laughter ringing in my ears, the whole world watching and waiting for me to crumble. But I'm not 17 anymore. I'm 58 years old, and I've built a life from nothing, survived the loss of the love of my life, and learned that other people's opinions of me are none of my business. I take a deep breath and feel the strength that 40 years of living has given me to settle into my bones. The silence stretches for what feels like eternity but is probably only seconds. I can feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, the collective held breath of people who remember high school drama and are wondering if middle age has taught us anything about grace. I stand slowly, my navy dress smooth and dignified, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I speak, my voice is calm and clear. I'm sorry you're in so much pain, Marianne, I say gently. I truly am. It's not what anyone expects, least of all Marianne herself. Her face crumples for just a moment before the anger hardens it again. Don't you dare pity me, she hisses. I don't pity you. I understand you. I glance around the room, then back at her. We were children when all this happened. Children making children's mistakes. But we're not children anymore. Alan has gone pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Greg hovers nearby, clearly wanting to intervene but not knowing how. Children's mistakes? Marianne's laugh is bitter. Is that what you call it? You disappear overnight, leave Alan heartbroken, and I'm the one who picks up the pieces. I'm the one who got pregnant, I finish quietly. And married a man who was grieving someone else. That couldn't have been easy. The words hit their mark. Marianne staggers slightly, and for a moment, I see past the perfectly coiffed exterior to the scared 19-year-old girl who found herself trapped in a marriage built on loneliness and obligation rather than love. That's enough, Alan says suddenly, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. He steps between us, his face anguished. Both of you, just stop. This is my fault, not hers. Alan, don't, I say softly. No, it's true. He looks at me with those same gentle brown eyes I remember from high school, now lined with 40 years of regret. I should have fought for you. Should have asked you to stay, or followed you to New York. Instead, I wallowed in self-pity and made terrible decisions that hurt everyone. Marianne makes a sound like a wounded animal. Terrible decisions? Is that what our marriage was to you? Our son? Terrible decisions? The pain in her voice is raw and real, and I feel my heart break for both of them. For the young woman who thought she could make someone love her by trapping them, and for the young man who confused obligation with honor. Our son is the best thing that ever happened to me, Alan says firmly. But our marriage, Marianne, we've been making each other miserable for decades. You know it as well as I do. Denise touches my arm gently. Laura, maybe we should. But Greg chooses that moment to take charge, clapping his hands together with forced enthusiasm. Okay, everyone, let's give them some space and get this party started. DJ, hit us with some Prince. Purple Rain begins to play, incongruously cheerful after the emotional devastation we've all just witnessed. But it works, people begin to move, conversations slowly pick up again, and the terrible tension starts to dissipate. Alan takes Marianne by the elbow, speaking quietly in her ear. She nods stiffly, her face flushed with embarrassment and alcohol. Together, they make their way toward the exit, Marianne leaning heavily on her husband's arm. At the doorway, Alan glances back at me. Our eyes meet across the crowded ballroom, and I see a lifetime of what-ifs and might-have-beens pass between us. Then the moment is gone, and they disappear into the hallway. Well, Denise says, settling back into her chair. That was overdue, I finish. That was 40 years overdue. The dance floor begins to fill as people shake off the awkwardness and embrace the nostalgic pull of our old music. Teresa, still graceful at 58, pulls her husband onto the floor for "Take on Me." Other couples follow, laughing at their rusty dance moves and the absurdity of trying to recreate their teenage selves. Greg appears at our table, his face creased with concern. Laura, I am so sorry about that. I had no idea Marianne was going to. It's okay, Greg. Really? No, it's not okay. This was supposed to be a celebration, not a public therapy session. He runs a hand through his thinning hair. I've been organizing these reunions for 20 years, and nothing like this has ever happened. Greg. I reach out and touch his arm. Some things need to happen. Maybe this was one of them. He looks at me with the same expression he used to wear in high school when trying to solve a particularly difficult math problem. You're being very gracious about someone attacking you in front of half our graduating class. Marianne wasn't attacking me, I say, surprising myself with the truth of it. She was attacking 40 years of her own unhappiness. I just happened to be a convenient target. Denise squeezes my hand. You always were too kind for your own good. Not kind. Just tired of carrying other people's anger around. The music shifts to "Don't Stop Believin'," and suddenly the dance floor is packed with people singing along, their faces bright with the joy of shared memory. Denise's husband extends his hand to Denise with an exaggerated bow. Shall we show these youngsters how it's done? Denise laughs and lets him pull her onto the floor. They move together with the easy comfort of a couple who've been married for 30 years, and watching them makes me miss Ethan with a sharp pang that catches me off guard. Dance. I turn to find Greg holding out his hand, his expression kind but cautious. I'm not sure I remember how, I admit. It's like riding a bicycle. A very rhythmic, potentially embarrassing bicycle. I laugh despite myself and let him lead me onto the floor. Greg was always a good dancer, not flashy like some of the football players, but steady and sure. He spins me carefully to "Billie Jean," and for a few minutes, I let myself get lost in the music and the strange comfort of being among people who knew me when I was young and uncertain. You know, Greg says as the song ends, Alan talked about you for years after you left, Greg. I know. Ancient history. But I thought you should know that you weren't forgotten. Not by him, anyway. Before I can respond, my phone buzzes insistently in my clutch. I glance at the screen and see Sarah's name. I'm sorry, I need to take this. I make my way through the crowd toward the quieter lobby area, pressing the phone to my ear. Sarah? What's wrong? Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. We have a crisis with the Pike Place contractors. My stomach drops. What kind of crisis? They found some structural issues behind the walls. Nothing too serious, but it's going to delay our opening by at least 6 weeks. Maybe 2 months. I close my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back onto my shoulders. This is my world, problems to solve, decisions to make, a business empire that requires constant attention. Okay, get me a conference call with the contractors and the architect first thing Monday morning. We'll figure this out. Already scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern. I knew you'd want to handle it personally. Good girl. And Sarah, thank you for taking care of this, of course. How's the reunion? Are you having fun reliving your youth? I glance back through the ballroom doors, where my former classmates are laughing and dancing to Sweet Child O' Mine, their faces flushed with wine and nostalgia. It's been educational. That sounds ominous. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Just remembering why I left this place. After I hang up, I stand in the hotel lobby for a moment, watching the reunion through the glass doors like a movie I'm no longer part of. The business call has reminded me who I am now, not the poor, powerless girl who let Marianne O'Donnell pour soda on her backpack, but a successful woman with responsibilities and people depending on her. There you are. I turn to find Alan standing near the elevator bank, his tie loosened and his face drawn with exhaustion. He's alone. Is Marianne okay? I ask. She's sleeping it off. Greg got her some coffee and aspirin, and I got her upstairs. He runs a hand over his face. God, Laura, I'm so sorry. What she said, the way she acted, there's no excuse for it. She's been carrying that anger for 40 years. Maybe it needed to come out. Not like that. Not in front of everyone. He takes a step closer, and I can smell his cologne, something sophisticated and alluring that Marianne probably chose for him. I need you to know that what she said about me pining for you all these years, it's not fair to put that on you. Alan. No, let me finish. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. There was a part of me that never got over losing you. But that's my burden to carry, not yours. You don't owe me anything, and you never did. The lobby is quiet except for the distant sound of Total Eclipse of the Heart, drifting from the ballroom. A few guests move past us toward the elevators, probably heading up to change clothes or freshen their makeup. We were kids, I say gently. We thought we were so adult, so sophisticated, but we were just kids playing at being grown up. The choices we made then, they don't define who we became. Don't they? His smile is sad. You left and built an empire. I stayed and built. Well, not much of anything, as it turns out. You raised a son. Marianne mentioned earlier that he's married, living in California? Alan's face brightens immediately. Michael. He's a pediatric nurse in Santa Monica. Married a wonderful woman last year. They're expecting their first baby in December. A pediatric nurse. That says something about the man who raised him. Marianne raised him too. Whatever else went wrong between us, we did that right. We stand in comfortable silence for a moment, two middle-aged people who once shared a perfect kiss on prom night, now strangers trying to make sense of the paths that brought us here. Laura, Alan says quietly, I know this is probably impossible timing, and maybe inappropriate given everything that just happened, but could I buy you a coffee sometime? Not like a date or anything presumptuous. Just as old friends trying to figure out what comes next. I look at his face, still handsome at 58, still carrying that gentle sadness that first drew me to him in high school. But I also see the weight of a failed marriage, the uncertainty of a man starting over at an age when most people have their lives figured out. Alan, you're still married. Separated. Officially, as of 6 months ago. The paperwork is. He sighs. It's complicated, but it's happening. We should have done it years ago. Then maybe you should focus on figuring out who you are when you're not married to Marianne. That's important work, and it's work you need to do alone. His face falls slightly, but he nods. You're right. Of course you're right. I just thought. I know what you thought. And in another life, under different circumstances, maybe we could have found our way back to each other. But this life, these circumstances, they're what we have to work with. And you're still grieving, Ethan? I am, of course. And you're still extricating yourself from Marianne. We're both in transition, Alan. Neither of us is ready for whatever this might be. He looks at me with those same brown eyes that used to make my teenage heart race. And I see acceptance there along with the disappointment. You always were the smart one, he says with a rueful smile. No, I was just the scared one. Fear made me careful, and careful turned out to be smart, I guess. Are you going back to the dance? I glance toward the ballroom, where the music has shifted to something slower. Time after time, the same song we danced to at prom. Through the glass doors, I can see couples swaying together, lost in their own memories. I think I'm done for tonight. It's been a long day. Yeah, it has. He straightens his tie and smooths his hair. Well, I should probably check on Marianne and then try to salvage what's left of the evening. Alan? Yeah? For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. It takes courage to start over. Thanks, Laura. That means a lot. I watch him walk back toward the ballroom, his shoulders a little straighter than they were when he first approached me. Then I head for the elevators, ready to retreat to my room and process everything that's happened. As the elevator doors close, I catch a glimpse of the reunion continuing without me, people dancing and laughing, making the most of their one night to pretend they're 18 again. Part of me envies them their ability to lose themselves in nostalgia. But I'm not 18 anymore, and I don't want to be. I'm 58 years old, and I've earned every line on my face, every gray hair, every hard-won piece of wisdom that's brought me to this moment. Tomorrow, I'll fly back to New York and deal with construction delays and business decisions. I'll have dinner with my daughters and continue building the life I've created from nothing but determination and bagel dough. Tonight, I'm going to order room service, take a long bath, and maybe call Sarah to talk through the Pike Place Market situation. Because this is who I am now, not the girl who got picked on in high school, but the woman who turned pain into purpose and dreams into reality. And that woman, I realize as I unlock my hotel room door, doesn't need anyone else's forgiveness or approval to be proud of the life she's built. The hotel lobby is quiet at 6:30 in the morning as I sit with my suitcase, waiting for my taxi to the airport. Through the windows, I can see Seattle waking up. Joggers along the waterfront, coffee shops opening their doors. I'm checking my phone when I see Marianne and Alan leaving through the lobby doors. Marianne looks hungover and embarrassed, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Alan catches my eye and gives me a light wave goodbye without words, his expression apologetic but resigned. They disappear into a waiting car. Laura, wait. I turn to see Teresa hurrying across the marble floor, still moving with that dancer's grace despite the early hour. I was hoping to catch you before you left, she says breathlessly. I need to apologize for everything I put you through in high school. Teresa's face is earnest, free of makeup and pretense. I was immature, just letting Marianne be mean and not doing anything when she bullied you, not stopping her. My parents and Marianne's parents are good friends, so I wanted to keep my friendship with Marianne. But that's no excuse. Teresa, we were teenagers. No, let me finish. Now being an adult and raising my own kids, I realized how wrong it was. I should have been braver. Her honesty touches me. I totally forgave you 40 years ago when I was leaving for Brooklyn. In fact, I even forgave Marianne as well. I've been having a happy and full life with my successful business and family. Really? Just like that? Life's too good to waste on old grudges. I smiled genuinely. Actually, you should come to my new bagel shop opening in a few months. I'll be here for that, and we can catch up then. Teresa hugs me warmly. I'd love that. I live in Belltown now, just blocks from Pike Place Market. As my taxi arrives and I settle into the backseat, I feel peaceful. Coming to this reunion gave me closure I didn't know I needed. I feel so lucky about the woman I became, strong enough to forgive, wise enough to let go, and grateful for the journey that brought me here. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more heartwarming stories to enjoy.